My name is Hamid Pourmand, and even after so many years, remembering this story still moves me deeply. It's hard to explain, but the memories come back, accompanied by smells, by sensations on my skin, as if I were there again. Before becoming a follower of Christ, before prison, before losing everything to gain what truly matters, I was just a boy in the port city of Bandar Bukar, Iran, a place where the smell of the sea mingles with the dried fish hanging from the doors. I was born in 1958, and my childhood was marked by the suffocating heat of the Persian Gulf, a heat that seemed to rise from the ground, seep through the soles of my sandals, and burn me from within. I had 3 brothers and was the second oldest. Our house was simple, made of mud, with a courtyard in the center. There, my mother, a silent woman full of faith, would spread out clothes and kneel to pray. My father, the owner of a small rice and spice shop, had rough hands but a tender way with me. I remember him stroking my hair, looking firmly into my eyes, and saying something I've never forgotten. "Hamid, be a man of honor. Serve your family, your country, your God." These words weren't just advice. They were a mission for my life. Our routine revolved around Islam. 5 times a day, the muezzin's voice echoed through the mosque's minarets, interrupting everything: play, meals, conversations. My mother would immediately rise, unroll her mat, and begin to pray, her lips moving in a rhythm I didn't understand but felt was sacred. At 8, I was already trying to imitate her. I would kneel beside her, bowing to Mecca, and repeating the surahs of the Quran I'd learned in the madrasa. I did everything with the seriousness of a child eager to please. But deep down, something nagged at me. It was a silent doubt, like a whisper from the other side of a thick wall. God, or Allah, as I knew him, seemed like a distant king, too powerful to approach, a sovereign to whom I owed respect and fear, but whom I never truly knew. This distance made me uneasy, but I kept it to myself, because in our community, doubt was seen as shame, a path to isolation. Meanwhile, I was just a curious boy, running through the dusty streets, climbing date palms, challenging my brothers to races to the sea. And it was on one of those afternoons, when I was about 10, that something changed. I entered, almost unnoticed, the home of our neighbor Aram, an older Assyrian Christian man with a calm I'd never seen in anyone. In our neighborhood, Christians were surrounded by whispers and suspicious glances. They were different, as if they came from another world, a world without mosques, or the call of the muezzin. His house smelled different, not of spices, but of old wood, and, perhaps, peace. And it was there, standing in the living room, that my eyes fell upon something that touched me deeply, a simple cross, made of 2 pieces of wood joined together. To a child, it was just an object, but to me, at that moment, it seemed to have a life, a power I had never felt before. When my eyes met that simple cross, a shiver ran through me, as if the symbol were looking at me, understanding me in a way no one else ever had. My voice came out weak, almost a whisper. "What is this?" Aram, who'd caught me red-handed, wasn't startled. He just smiled, a calm, sincere, unhurried smile. "It's a sign of love," he said. "God's love." Love? That seemed so foreign to me. The God I knew was strict, demanding obedience and fear. Love was something I felt at home, coming from my mother and father. But hearing that word associated with that cross made my heart race in an inexplicable way. I ran home, terrified, keeping that encounter to myself. I didn't tell anyone, but the image of that cross remained etched in my mind, a heavy and fascinating secret I carried with me, like a stone in my pocket. The following years were spent in total focus. School was tough, and I strived to be a model student, driven by a deep desire to see the pride in my father's eyes. He dreamed I would become something great, that my name would be worthy of more than just the family shop. I desperately wanted to fulfill that dream, to see that satisfied smile on his face. The spiritual yearning I felt as a child was eventually overwhelmed by the responsibilities and urgency of real life. At 16, life seemed to show a clear path. Iran was experiencing a moment of nationalist fervor, pride, and strength, and the army was recruiting promising young men. I vividly remember the soldiers marching through the city streets, the sound of their boots hitting the ground, their neat uniforms, their rifles drawn, the air of confidence they carried. They seemed to have a resolute purpose, something I envied deeply. I wanted to be like them, a man of honor, someone who protected his country, his people, a true hero. The image of those soldiers became an obsession for me. It was a concrete answer to my father's call, and to that emptiness I couldn't name. It was a tangible purpose, one I could see, touch, and wear. When I turned 18, I enlisted without hesitation. The farewell was difficult. I kissed my mother, who wept silently, but I saw hope in her eyes, the same hope that shone in my father's. "Serve with honor, Hamid," she said, and I promised myself I would do just that. Life in the army was a true baptism of fire. The desert sun burned my skin, seeping through the fabric of my uniform, leaving my body dry and salty. My legs ached from hours marching in the relentless heat. The weight of the rifle felt glued to my shoulder, a painful extension of my body. But surprisingly, I loved every second of the ordeal. There was something pure in the pain, a clarity in the exhaustion. For the first time, my purpose wasn't a vague idea. It was physical, brutal, and real. I was serving. I was becoming a man of honor. I learned to swallow my fear, to transform fatigue into strength, to lead by example. My officers noticed something in me, perhaps a stubbornness, a brute force that wouldn't give up. They saw in me not just a young man who obeyed orders, but someone who seemed born for it. And I clung to that certainty like a castaway clings to a piece of wood, trying to survive the storm that was coming. Promotions came faster than I could have imagined, even faster than for my peers. With each new insignia sewn onto my uniform, I felt I was shaping the man my father always dreamed of. Step by step, building by building, I was becoming that man. At 30, I reached the pinnacle of my career. I was Colonel Hamid Pormand. My boots shone so brightly, they reflected off the barracks floor with every step. My voice was firm, a command that made hundreds of soldiers move in perfect unison. They trusted me with their lives, and I carried that responsibility with fierce pride. I lived up to every expectation, sending money home, buying my parents a better home, far beyond the simple mud courtyard where I grew up. I was the fulfillment of my father's dream, a local hero, a respected officer. But when night fell, and I took off my colonel's armor, a disturbing truth dawned on me. Lying in my bunk, staring at the dark ceiling, I felt a hollowness in my chest, a hollow hole no decoration could fill. The greetings and salutations I'd received during the day disappeared in the silence of the night, leaving a haunting question. Is this all there is? Is this where it all ends? I tried to find comfort in prayer, in the position I'd known since childhood, facing Mecca, repeating the memorized words, but they sounded empty, like dry sand slipping through my hands, disappearing before it could reach anywhere. God remained a distant king, and I, his decorated servant, was desperately empty. I began to look at my soldiers with different eyes, not as a commander assessing his troops, but as someone searching for clues to fill that void within me. Most of them, Muslims like myself, performed their religious duties with the same mechanical precision with which they cleaned their weapons. But in their eyes, I saw the same emptiness I felt in my own. There were, however, exceptions. A young soldier named Raza caught my attention. Quiet and efficient, he never joined the others for prayers in the barracks. One night, during a patrol, I noticed the dim glow of a flashlight under his blanket. I assumed it was something forbidden, perhaps contraband. I approached silently and pulled the blanket firmly away. "What is this?" I asked, my colonel's voice sounding harsher than I intended. He froze, his face pale in the light. He held a small worn book. "It's a Bible, sir," he whispered. My duty required me to confiscate the book, to report him. This was a grave offense. But something about that young man stopped me. His eyes, there was no fear, only a profound peace, a serenity that completely disarmed me. I asked him to turn off the light and walked away. But that peace stayed with me, like a ghost impossible to forget. What did he have that I, a colonel, didn't? It was around this same time, on leave in Banda Bukar, that I met her, Arlet. She was at a market, her long dark hair shining in the sun as she bargained with a baker. An Assyrian Christian, she came from a faith that, to me, was full of mysteries and whispers. Our eyes met for a moment, and she smiled at me. A simple, open smile.
But it broke something inside me. The world around me seemed to freeze in that instant. We began to talk, and little by little, I discovered a woman with a strength and gentleness I had never known.
Arlette was unafraid to be different, to carry a faith that made her seem like a foreigner in her own land. What surprised me most was the way she spoke of Jesus. It wasn't with distant, awe-filled reverence, as I had learned to speak of Allah. For her, Jesus was a close friend, a confidant. "He loves us, Hamid," she told me one day, her voice soft but firm as a rock. "He died for us." Those words hit me with the force of a blow.
He died for us? Why would a God do that? All military logic, all the theology I knew seemed to crumble before that idea. I didn't understand, but a part of me, that empty, desperate part, wanted, with all its might, to understand. Arlette became my refuge. With her, I felt I was getting closer to something real, something bigger than my uniform, my medals, or even my country. Our wedding took place a year later, in 1986. It wasn't an easy decision, nor was it celebrated by everyone. My parents, whom I so desperately wanted to honor, were visibly worried. I heard the whispers and veiled conversations about how a Muslim man, an officer in the Iranian army, should marry a Muslim woman to protect the family's honor. Every word was a stab at my pride, a tremendous pressure to return to the path they had laid out for me. But the love I felt for Arlette, for the strength and peace she radiated, was stronger than any tradition. Our wedding was simple, almost secret, with only our closest family and a few friends in attendance. The air was filled with the scent of jasmine and spices, but also carried a quiet tension. Arlette wore a simple white dress, but her smile was so bright it seemed to light up the entire room, erasing any shadow of disapproval. That day I chose love over custom, her truth over their expectations. Little did I know that this would be just the first of many choices that would pit me against everything I knew. That same night, in our modest, quiet home after the last guests had left, Arlette did something that shook me to my foundations. In a way no battle or military training ever could. She took my hand, intertwined her fingers with mine, bowed her head, and began to pray aloud. "Jesus, thank you for Hamid, for our love, for our life." The words were simple, direct, but they hit me with the force of a wave. She wasn't reciting memorized verses to a distant king in the clouds. She was talking to someone right there in the room with us, someone she knew and loved. At that moment, a pang of envy and a longing for something I'd never had washed over me. I wanted that. I wanted that closeness, that certainty. The colonel within me, the man of order and discipline, wanted to understand the logic of that faith, but fear paralyzed me. To question that meant to question my father, my mother, my country, and the very God I had learned to serve. The risk was too great. My life became divided into two worlds. During the day I was Colonel Pourmand, the man of order and discipline. I led my men on marches under the blazing sun, the sound of our boots resounding like synchronized thunder. I inspected their rifles with a clinical eye, smelling the oil and metal, and planned missions on the borders of Iran, with maps spread out on the table and the responsibility for the lives of dozens of men weighing on my shoulders. During the day, my moments were filled with the weight of duty. I wore the armor of an unwavering leader, but at night, in the silence of our small apartment, that protection disappeared. Arlette slept peacefully beside me, her calm, steady breathing a living image of the peace that eluded me. I, however, remained awake, plunged into the shadows of darkness, haunted by the same images. Arlette's confident prayer, the simple cross in Aram's house, the serene face of soldier Raza holding the Bible. These images were like pieces of a puzzle that I didn't know how to put together, but that slowly dismantled all the certainty I had about my military life. The night became my true battlefield, invisible, cruel, and this internal struggle consumed me day after day. I began to observe Arlette more closely, especially in the mornings. At dawn, she would sit by the window with her Bible open. I would watch her delicate fingers glide over the words, as if touching something alive, and her face would light up with a calm that felt like an oasis in the desert of my restless soul. Curiosity grew within me, almost becoming an itch in my throat. Until, at one point, I couldn't take it anymore. I tried to sound casual, like it was just a random question. "What's in there?" Arlette looked up from her book and smiled at me,
a smile that seemed to understand all my anguish. "It's the truth, that's all," she said, holding the book out to me. "Want to see?" My heart raced. I took the Bible in my hands. The leather cover was worn, softened by years of use and, from what I could tell, years of love. My hands, the same ones that held rifles and signed orders, trembled as I held the object. It was like I was touching something forbidden, something dangerous that could burn me. Before anyone could see, I hid the book in the back of a drawer, fearing even my own men. I feared what that book could do to me. The Bible sat there in the drawer for days on end, a burning ember that burned inside me. My courage only came on a silent night, when Arlett's quiet breathing was the only sound besides the buzzing of the crickets outside. With the caution of a thief, I got up, grabbed the book, and sat down at our small kitchen table. I turned on a single bulb, which cast dancing shadows across the walls, forming a circle of light that seemed to isolate me from the world. My heart was beating fast, like a drum announcing an act of betrayal. With trembling fingers, I opened the book to the page Arlett had marked for me, the Gospel of John. My eyes scanned the lines until they settled on a single sentence. I didn't read the words. They grabbed me. "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Blinking was automatic, the air escaping from my lungs. It wasn't a suggestion, nor an opinion. It was a direct statement, coming from an authority I had never encountered. I reread the sentence, over and over again. With each reading, it became more real, more powerful. Jesus' voice seemed alive there, in that silent kitchen, as if he were sitting right in front of me, looking straight into my soul, into that hole I'd carried since childhood. All my life, for more than 20 years, I bowed toward Mecca, reciting prayers that, in my sincerity, rose and fell like echoes in an empty hall. They were the words of a servant to an unreachable master. But this was different. It wasn't a rule to be followed. It was a promise, a calling, a map pointing to a single destination. I slammed the book shut, the sound piercing the heavy silence of the room. My hands shook uncontrollably. I, Colonel Hamid Porand, a man who commanded other men, trained to be strong and unshakable, felt in that moment like a little boy lost in the darkness. And that voice, on that page, was the only light I could see. That first night of reading was just the beginning of a long and dangerous secret journey. For months, I lived a silent war. The Bible became both my treasure and my torment. I hid it in the barracks and locked myself in my office to read it, even if only for a few minutes. Every knock on the door made my heart race, and I threw piles of papers and military reports to hide the holy book, my heart always heavy. In those stolen moments, I devoured the pages. I read about Jesus' love, a love that asked for nothing in return. I read about his sacrifice, an idea my military Muslim mind couldn't comprehend. I read about the resurrection. It was all so radically different from the faith that had shaped my life. In Islam, I was taught to submit, to follow rigid rules, to execute a plan of merit, to perhaps one day earn God's favor. But Jesus' words were an invitation, not a code of conduct. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Rest. That word echoed in my empty chest like a church bell. Rest. I wanted that more than any medal or promotion. I was exhausted, tired of pretending to be the perfect officer, the devout Muslim, tired of carrying the weight of my own emptiness, my own inadequacy. Jesus' invitation was an oasis for a man dying of thirst in the desert, but drinking that water came at a terrible price. Embracing this faith was not just a change of heart. In Iran, it was a crime, an apostasy. Leaving Islam could mean losing everything, my career, my honor, the respect of my family. It could mean prison. It could mean death. I thought about Arlett, about the future we were building. Did I have the right to risk his life, his safety, for the sake of this search for my soul? It was a promise of rest on one side and the threat of total destruction on the other. I was paralyzed between heaven and hell. My castle of secrets crumbled one ordinary night. I was so absorbed in reading, sitting in our armchair, that I didn't hear Arlett approach. When I felt his presence, I looked up, startled. It was too late to hide. The Bible was there, open on my lap, exposed to the light from the lamp. I froze, expecting a rebuke, maybe disappointment,
or anger at my cowardice. But she didn't say anything. He simply sat down on the floor beside me, as he had so often done, and took my hand. Her eyes held no judgment, only a deep compassion that made me melt. She leaned close, and with a whisper so soft it sounded like a sigh, yet so powerful, she said, "Hamid, Jesus is calling you. Don't be afraid." Hearing that from her was like a dam breaking inside me. She knew what I carried, the battle raging in my heart, and she wasn't afraid of it. Her words didn't condemn me. On the contrary, they gave me permission to feel everything I was feeling. And when that permission came, the fear I'd hidden for so long exploded with full force. That simple sentence shattered the Colonel's armor, his discipline, his strength. What was left was a frightened, vulnerable man. "What if I'm wrong, Arlet?" I asked, my voice breaking, exposing the deepest fear I held. "What if this costs us everything? Our home, my career, our lives?" The tears I'd tried to hold back for years burst forth freely. I needed her to understand the depth of the abyss I was staring at. She looked at me, tears in her eyes too, but with a conviction stronger than any wall. She squeezed my hand tightly and said simply and directly, "Jesus is worth it." Those words were a blow. He is the only truth, not an opinion, not a possibility, but a certainty as firm as the sun that rises each morning. I wanted to argue, to cling to the reasons, to the security of the faith I knew, but her certainty left me defenseless. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. The phrase, "Jesus is worth it," reverberated in my mind like an irresistible call, a powerful wave pulling me away from the safe shore I knew into the open sea of faith. Everything changed in 1990. I was sent to an isolated base in the middle of nowhere, near the border, where the world seemed made only of wind, dust, and silence. The nights were freezing cold, and the sky, devoid of any artificial light, was a black blanket filled with shining stars, indifferent to my inner agony. The solitude of that place was a mirror of my soul. One night, inside my tent, the conflict I harbored reached its breaking point. I couldn't take it anymore. The struggle, the fear, the hope, everything crushed me. Then, for the first time, I set aside the prayers I knew and, kneeling on the cold, rough ground, murmured to nothing, "If you're real, show me. I'm lost. I need you." Tears stung my eyes, and I felt ridiculous. A colonel in the Iranian army, trained to be tough, crying like a child in the dark. But in that moment there was no strength or pride, just a weary soul, begging for answers. With my heart full of doubts, I fell asleep right there. But the sleep wasn't empty. That night my dream was more real than life itself. I found myself in a green field, under a warm sky, a light breeze caressing my face. In front of me stood a man. His face radiated a kindness I'd never experienced, but it was his eyes that captivated me. Eyes that seemed to burn with a fire full of love. Eyes that seemed to see into every hidden corner of my heart. He wore a simple white robe, but his presence filled everything around me with a peace so profound, it seemed to soothe every part of my body and soul, a peace I had sought all my life but never found. He looked at me and spoke my name, Hamid. His voice was soft, but with an authority that left no room for doubt. "Follow me." In that moment, I knew with all my being that it was Jesus before me. My knees weakened, and I fell at his feet, sobbing. But they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of pure joy, of immense relief, as if I had finally been found after years of being lost. He touched my shoulder, and in that touch, I felt something release from me. It was a weight I didn't even know I was carrying, as if invisible chains were breaking, and I was finally free. I woke with a start, my face wet with fresh tears, my heart pounding so fast it felt like it was about to burst from my chest. The tent around me was still cold and dark, like the desert that surrounded us. But inside me, a light shone brighter than any darkness. It was as if the sun had decided to rise first inside my heart. Doubt, fear, and anguish had all vanished, giving way to a certainty as solid as the earth beneath my knees. In that moment, something inside me understood beyond reason. Jesus was the truth. He was the only way to God. It wasn't a learned idea, but a reality I had experienced. In the silence of that tent, the words escaped my mouth in a whisper filled with surrender. "I am yours." And as I said it,
A wave of peace enveloped me. The feeling of finally, after a lifetime of aimless wandering, being home. The next morning, the world seemed different. The sun illuminating the desert had a new, friendlier glow. The colors of the rocks and sand seemed more vivid, more intense. I wanted to shout to the sky, tell all my soldiers what had happened to me, share the joy that barely fit in my chest. But the harsh reality of Iran fell over me like a cold shadow. I couldn't speak. Being a convert there meant being a target. I kept the secret to myself until I got home. The first person I revealed everything to was Arlet. I didn't have to say much. She saw it in my eyes. When I told her about the dream, she cried uncontrollably and hugged me with a force that nearly took my breath away, holding me close to her chest. Her voice, shaky and muffled by tears, said, "I've prayed for this day, Hamid, every day." At that moment, I understood that I was not alone on this journey. She walked with me, praying beside me, carrying our dream in her hands. That same night, we knelt together. I was no longer observing her faith from afar, but walking alongside her as one soul. She took the lead, leading our prayer, thanking Jesus for finding me in the desert, for calling me to this new life. Every word she spoke felt like a burst of hope into my wounded heart. I felt the love of Christ flowing through her, through our union, and for the first time, I didn't envy her faith. I shared it. It was a moment of pure joy, a heavenly celebration. But real life didn't fade. While tears of gratitude still wet our faces, a fear lingered deep in my chest. What would happen now? How could an Iranian army colonel live this faith? The joy of salvation was real, but the price of following it in that place was high, deadly even. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with dangers I could barely imagine. I knew I couldn't go it alone. I needed a community, brothers and sisters in faith, even if it increased the risks we already faced. It was Arlet who first told me about Pastor Daniel. He led a secret house church, a small group hidden in the shadows of Banda Bushehr. Finding this group was almost like a spy operation. The meeting was scheduled in a simple, discreet house in a nondescript neighborhood with no sign to reveal what was happening inside. I was greeted by an older man whose face told stories. Deep wrinkles mapped years marked by persecution and steadfast faith. His eyes were kind, but weighted with constant worry, and yet there was an inexplicable peace there. The room was small and stuffy. The windows were covered with thick cloths that kept out light and sound. The air carried a strong scent of tea, mixed with something invisible but palpable, the smell of fear. Pastor Daniel offered me a cup, his hands firm, and listened to my story in silence, nodding every now and then, as if he had heard it all many times before. When I finished, the silence stretched for a heavy moment. Then he looked at me, and it wasn't a look of pity, nor of admiration, but of a realism born of suffering. "Hamid, are you ready to follow Jesus, no matter the cost?" It was the most important question of my life. Suddenly, the weight of everything I'd been carrying fell upon me. I thought of my men, of the career I'd built with effort and sacrifice. I thought of my father's pride, of the dream he had for me. I thought of my family, of society, of what everyone would think and say. But most of all, I thought of Arlet, of her love that never wavered. And I thought of the dream, of the face of Jesus, and the peace I felt upon meeting him. A deep calm washed over me. The war within me had finally come to an end. "Yes," I replied, and my voice surprised me. For the first time it sounded firm, without doubt. "Yes, I'm ready." That same night, in a ceremony so quiet it felt like a whispered secret, Pastor Daniel baptized me. There was no river, no grand baptistry, just a tub filled with water, tucked away in the back of that locked and guarded house. Arlet was beside me, holding my hand, her eyes shining with tears that mixed joy and hope. When he dunked me, the cold water running down my face seemed to wash away not only the desert dust, but all the years of emptiness and sin. I felt renewed, cleansed, like a soldier who had just been given a new mission, more important than all the ones before. And as I emerged from that water, something inside me changed forever. I was no longer just Colonel Hamid Porand, the army officer. My true identity was now different, Hamid, son of God. But this joy was accompanied by fear. I was a Christian, but the world around me still demanded that I be the Muslim colonel everyone knew. And so began the most difficult phase of my life, a double existence where every step was a meticulous calculation. During the day at the barracks, I remained the strict and disciplined officer, but in moments of solitude, I locked the door to my office, not to study maps or military strategies, but to whisper psalms and prayers. David's words became my refuge amidst the chaos. At home, the Bible that had once been hidden in the drawer now rested under my pillow, always there, close to my heart. The tension was constant. I lived with the suffocating feeling of being watched, afraid of a slip, a word spoken at the wrong time that could give everything away. Protecting my life and that of my family became an exhausting daily task, a tenuous balance between faith and danger. Finally, I had found a place to belong. Arlette and I joined Pastor Daniel's church, Jamaat Arabani. Our services were small acts of silent resistance. We met in basements, living rooms, bedrooms, always moving to escape the watchful eyes. We sang our hymns in whispers, constantly afraid that a neighbor would hear. Every creak of the door, every slower car outside, made my heart race and the silence take over. The risk was real, palpable, but what we received in return outweighed the fear. Feeling the presence of Jesus in that group of people who, like me, risked everything to worship him was a force that sustained me. Looking at Arlette's face, illuminated by candlelight as we prayed together, gave me a profound certainty. I thought to myself, feeling a fire grow inside my chest, this is it. This is what truth looks like. Jesus' love burned in my bones and was worth every risk, every fear. One of those nights, I met a young man named Ali. He was like me, a former Muslim, but his story was stark. His hands shook as he spoke to our small group. Ali had lost his job. His family disowned him, and he was treated as if he were dead, all because he chose to follow Jesus. Listening to him, I saw the ghost of my own future. The pain, the cost in flesh and blood were there, before me. When he finished and the heavy silence fell, I approached slowly and asked in a low voice the question that burned within my soul. Why continue? Why go through all this? Ali looked at me, and a sad smile appeared on her tear-stained face. Because Jesus is real, brother, he said. He's the only one who loves me like that. The simplicity of that answer, mixed with pain, hit me like a punch in the chest. I saw myself in that story, the fear, the loss, but also the unshakable certainty. Ali's words echoed within me for days. He's the only one who loves me like this. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jesus wasn't just a belief, a doctrine to memorize, or a difficult path to follow. He was a living person calling me to a relationship, to love him as intensely as he loved me. It was a call to respond to his sacrifice with my own love. I went home that night, hugged Arlette, and cried, not secretly, but openly, brokenly in her arms. She didn't need to ask why. She just enveloped me with love. Through my tears, I whispered the words she had once said to me, but which were now mine, forged in my own life. He's worth it. She pulled back a little, looked into my eyes, her own shining, and said, he's always worth it, my love. And at that moment, we knew we were ready for whatever came our way. Being a Christian colonel in Iran was like walking a tightrope stretched over a fiery pit. On the outside, I was the image of authority, of loyalty to the regime. I led border patrols, the jeep bouncing on the rocky roads, desert dust seeping into everything around me. I trained my men to be precision machines, their faces hardened by the rigorous discipline I enforced. But inside, every order I gave, every salute I gave, felt like a lie. I walked around the barracks, the sound of my boots echoing on the cold concrete, and wondered, if they could see the fire for Jesus that burned in my soul, would they still follow me or drag me into the darkness? I was their leader, but I felt completely alone in the crowd. I carried a truth that could kill me, but which, paradoxically, was what kept me truly alive. It was then that I made a decision that would change everything. A young soldier under my command, named Hussein, came to me after training, his face pale, his hands trembling. He asked to speak privately. In my office, behind a locked door, he confessed that he had found a Bible and was secretly reading it. The words of Jesus were touching his heart, breaking it.
"Sir," he asked, his voice breaking, "is Jesus real?" My blood ran cold. By law, I should have reported him, even arrested him. But looking into his eyes, I saw the same hunger, the same fear I'd felt. In that moment, it was no longer the colonel speaking, but the Hamid who'd been found in the desert. I took a deep breath and crossed the line. Yes, Hussein, he is real. He is the truth. I shared my story, spoke of the dream, of the peace I had found. And that same night, in a hidden room, in an act of courage and faith, I baptized him, pouring water over his head while Pastor Daniel prayed with us. He was the first soul I had led to Christ, and I knew I had just signed my own sentence. Every step I took toward Jesus brought me closer to a bonfire. The atmosphere in the barracks changed. I felt piercing stares on my back, heard whispers that stopped when I entered a room. Paranoia became my constant companion. The clearest warning came during a routine inspection of the barracks. An officer, a rival in the race for promotions, was rummaging through my belongings. And then he found the Bible, which I, foolishly, had left under a stack of reports. My heart stopped. He lifted the book, small and dangerous in his hand, and asked with a barely concealed smile, "What is it, Colonel?" Time froze. In an instant, I lied. "A gift from my wife's family. I'm keeping it for her." My voice was firm, but it was a miracle. He stared at me, eyes narrowing, trying to read my soul. Those seconds were the longest of my life. To my utter astonishment, he simply placed the book back on the table and moved on. I left there with shaky legs, knowing I had escaped by a thread. That night, I broke down. I held Arlette in my arms and cried like I'd never cried before. The mask of the strong colonel finally slipped. "I'm scared," I confessed, for the first time without reservation. She just hugged me, allowing me to release all the panic I was carrying. But the risks only increased. In 1994, we received news that a pastor in another city had been arrested. He was taken away and simply disappeared. The family was left without answers, without news. Fear stopped being a distant possibility and became a real and imminent threat. The shadows closed in around us, and I felt it in my bones. The final blow came from Arlette. We were in the kitchen, our sons, Emmanuel and David, already asleep. She held my hand, her face serious in the dim light. "Hamid," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They're watching you. I can feel it." I believed her. Arlette's intuition had always been our spiritual compass. The circle was complete. There was nowhere left to run. I remember that night before the final warning. I went to my son's room and watched them sleep. Emmanuel, 10, and David, 8. Their serene faces, their quiet breathing. They were the reason for everything. I wanted to protect them, to give them a safe world. But the faith that had given me eternal life threatened their lives here on earth. My heart broke with the weight of that paradox. I returned to the living room and sat beside Arlette, holding her hand in silence. We didn't need words. We both knew we were on the brink. We entrust our future to Jesus, the same Jesus who brought us together, who found me, who sustained us. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew he would be with us. The peace I felt that night was not the absence of fear, but his presence in the midst of fear. At that moment, I didn't know that this would be the last night of my life as I knew it. I didn't know that the warmth of Arlette's hand, the sound of my children's breathing, the silence of our home, all of it was about to be ripped away from me. As I tell this story, I realize that my entire journey, from the boy who saw the cross to the colonel who baptized a soldier, was a preparation for the fire that was to come, a fire that would test every fiber of my faith, that would burn away everything I was, so that only what Christ had become in me would remain. The end of that life was just hours away, and I had no idea. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear what it sparked in you. Share your experience or opinion in the comments. I read everything with great care. And if you want to continue following transformative stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The journey of faith never stops. Click now on the recommended video that is appearing on your screen to find out what happened to another Christian who faced the impossible. A warm hug, and may the peace of Christ be with you always.